Long before the name Tyrannosaurus rex would ever echo across history, the Earth belonged to a different order of giants. The continents were still drifting into their modern shapes. Oceans flooded the lowlands, and warm forests stretched from pole to pole. The planet was hotter, wetter, and far more dangerous than the world we know today. Every sunrise revealed movement. Every shadow hid teeth. This was the late Jurassic, a time when life had already recovered from earlier extinctions and was expanding into every available niche. Massive plant-eaters moved across the landscape in slow migrating caravans. Sauropods, animals longer than passenger trains, crossed floodplains in herds so large they reshaped entire ecosystems simply by walking. Their footsteps formed lakes. Their feeding paths became open corridors through dense vegetation. But no creature grows that large without attracting attention. Predators followed them constantly, not lone hunters, not occasional attackers, but entire ecological systems built around killing. For millions of years, the struggle between hunter and hunted had been refining weapons more efficiently than any intelligent design ever could. Muscles strengthened, senses sharpened, and jaws specialized. Yet none of the predators alive at this time resembled the tyrant king that future generations would imagine as the ultimate ruler of dinosaurs. The tyrannosaurs existed, but they were small enough to be ignored. Early members of the Tyrannosaur family stood barely taller than a human. They were fast, lightly built, and agile, living on the edges of ecosystems dominated by far larger carnivores. Their skulls were narrow, their bite weak compared to future descendants. They hunted small animals, scavenged carcasses, and survived by caution rather than dominance. They were not kings. They were survivors. At the top of the food chain stood entirely different creatures, predators built for a world overflowing with enormous prey. Instead of crushing strength, they relied on slicing efficiency. Instead of ambush, they specialized in endurance. These hunters did not need the strongest bite on earth. They needed to open wounds that never stopped bleeding, and they were everywhere. Across what would one day become North America, Europe, Africa, and South America, a lineage of predators evolved with a terrifyingly consistent design. Long skulls, serrated teeth shaped like curved blades, arms powerful enough to hold struggling prey, bodies balanced for sustained pursuit rather than explosive speed. They were not bone breakers, they were flesh cutters. The ecosystem supported them because the ecosystem required them. Giant herbivores could not be killed quickly. They had to be weakened, exhausted, and slowly drained of strength. A single bite rarely ended a life. Instead, attacks were repeated, coordinated, and patient. For a sauropod, death was often not sudden. It was gradual. One attack would open a wound, another would deepen it. The prey would continue walking for hours or even days, while blood loss weakened its movements. Eventually, it slowed. Then it stopped. Only then did feeding begin. This strategy did not demand the strongest predator. It demanded the most efficient one. In this ancient world, efficiency beat power. Fossil beds reveal the scale of this domination. Entire landscapes contain the remains of herbivores marked with slicing bite patterns, identical across continents, separated by vast oceans. This was not a local hunter. This was a global dynasty of predators ruling for tens of millions of years. And during all that time, the ancestors of Tyrannosaurus rex remained in the background. The balance of power was clear. Large slicing predators held the apex role. Smaller opportunists adapted around them. Evolution had chosen its rulers, and it did not favor bone-crushing strength yet. The world was built for giants that specialized in wearing prey down rather than overpowering it. But ecosystems never remain stable forever. Slowly, climates shifted, inland seas expanded and retreated, forest types changed, prey animals evolved thicker hides and altered migration routes. Some herbivores grew even larger, while others became faster and more defensive. Each environmental pressure forced predators to adapt or disappear. For millions of years, the dominant hunters remained successful. Their design was proven, refined by countless generations of survival. Yet, within the shadows of their territory, a different evolutionary experiment was quietly unfolding. Small tyrannosaurs were changing, not growing larger yet, but changing in proportion. Their skulls thickened, their teeth became sturdier rather than sharper, their senses improved, especially smell and depth perception. Instead of competing directly with the dominant predators, they exploited different opportunities. They fed on carcasses more efficiently. They detected prey sooner. They processed food faster. They were not stronger. They were smarter hunters. At first, these differences meant little. The giants still ruled open ground. A small tyrannosaur would never challenge a massive slicing predator. The hierarchy remained unquestioned. But evolution does not operate on immediate victories. It operates on future advantage. The world was slowly preparing for a change no creature could perceive, because power in nature does not belong to the strongest animal alive. It belongs to the animal best suited to the environment that exists, and environments always change. The age of the first great rulers was reaching its peak, not its end. They had not been defeated. They had not yet even been challenged. They dominated because they perfectly matched a world full of colossal prey that could only be killed through repeated cutting attacks. But somewhere in the timeline ahead, the balance would shift. A predator lineage built for slicing would meet a world that rewarded crushing. And when that happened, History would remember the newcomer as the king. For now, though, the throne belonged to an older dynasty, a lineage of giants that ruled so completely that the future tyrant king would only rise after they were gone. The story of the greatest predator, feared even by later legends, does not begin with Tyrannosaurus rex. It begins with the hunters that came before kings. The dominance of the early giant predators did not rely on sudden violence alone. Their power came from persistence. The landscapes they inhabited were vast floodplains crossed by rivers that changed course every season. Herds of herbivores rarely stayed in one place for long. Food moved and predators followed. Tracking mattered more than speed. A single sauropod herd could stretch across kilometers, individuals separated by distance but bound by instinct. The young stayed near the center. The strongest adults walked at the edges. Injured members struggled to keep pace, and predators understood this weakness. They did not need to outrun the herd. They only needed to outlast it. Fossil trackways show parallel paths, enormous footprints traveling together for days. Alongside them appear the prints of carnivores, moving in the same direction, not sprinting, not charging, simply following. Sometimes the distance between them remained constant for hours. The prey knew they were being hunted, and the hunters knew fear would create mistakes. A tired animal makes errors. When exhaustion set in, the attack began. A single predator would approach first, testing reactions. A defensive kick from a sauropod could shatter bone, so caution guided every movement. Another hunter circled from the opposite side. The prey turned toward one threat and exposed its flank to another. A slash landed. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to matter. Then they withdrew. Blood loss did the work that jaws could not finish instantly. Over time, the animal weakened, unable to maintain the pace required to remain with the herd. Eventually, distance opened between it and protection. Only then did the predators commit fully. This hunting strategy required intelligence, coordination, and patience. The giant slicing predators were not reckless monsters. They were calculated killers, adapted to prey far larger than themselves. Their bodies reflected this purpose. Their necks allowed wide lateral movement for cutting bites. Their teeth were not meant to withstand bone-crushing impact. Instead, they acted like rows of serrated knives, optimized to tear muscle with minimal resistance. Efficiency again defined survival. In such a world, brute strength alone held limited value. A predator that tried to overpower a sauropod directly would risk fatal injury. The ecosystem rewarded the hunter that could win without unnecessary damage. Evolution reinforced this design across continents, and species separated by oceans converged toward nearly identical anatomy. Across northern landmasses lived predators such as Acrocanthosaurus, while in southern regions, larger relatives evolved into even more massive forms. Their skulls grew longer, reducing bite force but increasing cutting surface. Their bodies balanced weight for long-distance pursuit rather than ambush acceleration. They became the default solution to a universal problem: how to kill an animal that could not be killed quickly. Meanwhile, the smaller tyrannosaurs continued living in the margins. Their world was not the open plains, but the complex environments near rivers and forest edges. There they hunted quicker prey, animals that demanded precision rather than endurance. To catch them required accurate depth perception and rapid decision-making. Gradually, their forward-facing eyes became more refined. Their brains devoted more space to sensory processing. They learned to rely on awareness rather than size. Scavenging also played a role in shaping them. Carcasses left behind by the giant predators provided opportunity but also danger. Arriving too early risked confrontation. Arriving too late meant nothing remained. Detecting decay from long distance allowed these smaller hunters to time their approach perfectly. Over generations, smell became one of their greatest tools. None of this threatened the giants yet, but it created a different type of predator. Nature rarely chooses one path exclusively. It experiments constantly, running multiple survival strategies at the same time. In this era, slicing hunters dominated because prey size favored them. Yet, ecological diversity allowed alternative designs to persist. The tyrannosaurs were not failures. They were reserves, waiting for conditions to change. Evidence from bone beds reveals something unusual. As millions of years passed, certain herbivores began evolving thicker bones and altered muscle attachments, possibly responses to repeated slashing attacks. While the slicing predators remained effective, their method depended on prolonged pursuit. If prey adapted to endure blood loss longer or move in more defensive formations, the advantage of cutting would slowly decline. A different killing method would eventually become more efficient. But efficiency changes slowly. The age of the slicing giants lasted tens of millions of years, far longer than human civilization has existed. Entire ecosystems were built around them. Rivers flowed through territories defined by their presence. Scavengers evolved jaws shaped to utilize the leftovers of their hunts. Smaller carnivores learned avoidance behaviors based on their patrol routes. They were not merely animals, they were environmental forces. Then the climate began its gradual transformation. Continental drift altered ocean currents. Some regions became more seasonal, introducing periods of scarcity. Migration patterns tightened. Prey animals no longer wandered endlessly across uniform landscapes. They followed narrower corridors dictated by water availability. Ambush opportunities increased. In tighter environments, endurance chases lost some effectiveness. A predator designed to slash repeatedly over open ground faced difficulty maneuvering through denser terrain. Meanwhile, hunters, capable of delivering devastating single attacks, gained advantage. Still, the old rulers remained dominant. Their extinction did not occur overnight. nor through sudden catastrophe. Their decline began as subtle pressure, slight reductions in range, slight competition from emerging predators, slight changes in prey behavior. Across generations, these slight changes accumulated. The tyrannosaurs, still relatively small compared to the giants, began growing larger. Their skulls thickened further, and their teeth became more robust. They were not yet apex predators, but they were no longer minor participants either. They occupied a middle ground between scavenger and hunter, capable of seizing opportunities others could not. The world was transitioning between two styles of predation. One favored precision cuts delivered many times. The other would favor overwhelming force delivered once. But during this chapter of Earth's history, the first style still reigned supreme. The slicing giants controlled the balance of life and death, and no challenger had yet proven superior. The future tyrant king had ancestors walking the land, but they had not earned their title. They lived in a world shaped by predators greater than themselves, inheriting territories carved by hunters whose reign stretched across ages unimaginable to human perception. Before the rise of the king, there was an empire, and it had not yet fallen. As the Jurassic world gave way to the early Cretaceous, the great slicing predators did not fade. They expanded. Continents that were once connected drifted apart, yet the same type of hunter appeared across them all. From North America to Africa, and from Europe to South America, fossils reveal nearly identical designs separated by vast oceans. This was not coincidence. It was convergent success. Evolution had discovered a highly effective killing machine and repeated it wherever conditions allowed. These predators belonged to a lineage now known as the carcharodontosaurs, named for teeth that resembled those of massive sharks. Each tooth was long, flattened, and lined with serrations like the edge of a knife. Under magnification, the edges show microscopic grooves that reduced friction during cutting. When the jaws closed, flesh parted easily. Bone contact was avoided. Their bite was not built to shatter, but to slice with minimal resistance. Their skulls tell the same story. Long and narrow compared to later tyrannosaurs, they sacrificed crushing power for reach and precision. Muscles attached in ways that favored rapid opening and closing rather than sustained pressure. A single bite might not end a life, but it would begin the process of ending it. One of the earliest giants of this group appeared in North America, Giganotosaurus. It stood nearly as tall as a two-story structure at the hips and stretched over 10 meters in length. Along its spine rose tall neural spines forming a ridge across its back, likely supporting powerful muscles used to stabilize the body during repeated attacks. Fossil sites show it lived alongside enormous sauropods such as Sauroposeidon, animals so tall their heads could reach the height of a modern building. A predator does not grow that large unless its prey demands it. The bones of herbivores from these sites contain healed wounds matching carcharodontosaur teeth patterns. The animals survived initial attacks and continued living for months afterward. This reveals not failed hunts, but typical hunts. The predators injured prey repeatedly until weakness accumulated. Killing was a process, not an instant. In Africa, an even larger relative emerged, Carcharodontosaurus itself. Its skull alone approached the length of a human adult. Estimates suggest its jaws could open wide enough to grip the flank of massive prey animals in a single motion. Yet, despite its size, its bite force remained lower than later tyrannosaurs. Strength was not its advantage. Damage area was. South America hosted multiple species at once, including Mapusaurus, which is found in bone beds containing several individuals together. This discovery suggests a possibility rarely seen in giant theropods: group behavior. Whether cooperative hunting or simply shared feeding, the presence of multiple adults in the same location indicates tolerance beyond simple territorial encounters. Against colossal prey, numbers matter. A herd of predators could inflict multiple wounds in quick succession, overwhelming even the largest herbivore defenses. Sauropods possessed tails capable of lethal strikes, but they could not defend all sides simultaneously. Each attacker required only a brief opening. Over time, exhaustion favored the hunters. These giants did not ambush from hiding. Their size made concealment nearly impossible. Instead, they relied on intimidation and inevitability. Once they selected a target, escape became unlikely. The prey could flee temporarily, but it could not remove the injury already inflicted. Every step drained energy. Every movement widened the wound. In this way, the carcharodontosaurs controlled ecosystems not just by killing, but by influencing movement. Herds avoided certain valleys and river crossings known to host predators. Migration routes shifted around their territories. Even without attacking, their presence shaped the geography of life. At this time, tyrannosaurs remained minor players. Fossils show species such as Dilong and Eotyrannus, lightly built animals with narrow skulls and grasping forelimbs. They hunted smaller prey and avoided direct conflict with the giants. In any confrontation, they would have been overpowered quickly. Their role resembled that of opportunistic carnivores, living beneath a dominant predator hierarchy. Yet their anatomy continued changing. While the slicing giants optimized for large prey warfare, the tyrannosaurs optimized for bite precision. Their teeth thickened, their skull bones fused more tightly, and their jaw muscles reorganized. These changes were subtle and provided no immediate advantage in a world ruled by giant cutters. But evolution does not measure success by present dominance alone. It accumulates potential. Across millions of years, the giant killers expanded further. Their fossils appear across multiple climates, from lush floodplains to semi-arid environments. They proved adaptable, able to follow migrating herds across long distances. Their long legs supported energy-efficient walking, allowing them to patrol territories continuously rather than waiting in ambush. They were not sprinters, they were relentless. The size of prey animals during this period encouraged their dominance. Many herbivores exceeded lengths of 20 meters. A predator attempting a single decisive attack risked severe injury. A slicing predator avoided that risk by attacking repeatedly from safer angles. Evolution favored the method that minimized danger while ensuring eventual success. But environmental change never stops. The early Cretaceous saw increasing diversity among herbivores. Some species became more heavily armored, others evolved faster movement. Smaller herbivores grew more numerous, creating new ecological opportunities. A predator designed only for enormous prey could not exploit all available food sources efficiently. This created space for alternative strategies. The tyrannosaurs began occupying those roles. They hunted mid-sized animals, scavenged efficiently, and occasionally targeted weakened large prey. Their improved senses allowed them to locate carcasses before the giants returned. In a world of specialists. For now, specialization still triumphed. The giant slicing predators remained unmatched in their niche. Their design had dominated for tens of millions of years, and nothing yet suggested their reign would end. The landscape belonged to them, and the future tyrant king still walked unnoticed beneath their shadow. But shadows define shape, and within that shadow, a different predator was slowly learning how to rule. Dominance in nature rarely depends on a single weapon. The success of the giant slicing predators came from a combination of anatomy, behavior, and environment working together as one system. Their bodies were engineered for endurance, hunting on a scale few other land predators have ever achieved. Their legs were long but not built for explosive sprinting. Instead, their joints and muscle attachments show adaptations for energy-efficient movement. They could walk for hours without exhaustion, covering enormous distances while following migrating herds. The structure of their hips distributed weight evenly, reducing strain during prolonged pursuit. Every part of their body favored persistence over speed. Their skulls reinforced the same strategy. Unlike the deep and heavily reinforced skulls of later tyrannosaurs, the carcharodontosaur skull was lighter relative to its size. This allowed faster head movement during attacks. The jaws could swing sideways and backward in slicing motions, maximizing tissue damage. Instead of a crushing clamp, the bite acted as a cutting sweep. The teeth themselves were replaceable tools. Fossils show that they shed teeth frequently, sometimes dozens over a lifetime. Broken teeth embedded in herbivore bones indicate repeated contact during feeding and hunting. Losing teeth carried little cost because new ones grew quickly. The predator did not rely on preserving a perfect bite. It relied on constant replacement. Such a system was ideal for attacking prey that fought back. Sauropods could weigh more than 10 times as much as their attackers. A single kick could break ribs or legs. A tail strike could be fatal. Direct confrontation would favor the herbivore's mass and leverage. But repeated cutting from safer angles shifted the balance. Each wound weakened muscle function. Blood loss reduced endurance. Infection sometimes followed days later. The predator did not need to win immediately. It only needed to ensure the prey could not fully recover. Bone beds provide evidence of this slow lethality. Many large herbivore skeletons show partially healed bite marks. These animals lived with injuries inflicted weeks or months earlier. Some eventually died from new attacks that reopened old wounds. The predators shaped not just individual deaths, but entire life histories of their prey. Fear influenced behavior. Herd animals clustered tighter in dangerous regions, limiting feeding options. Migration timing changed to avoid peak predator activity. Young individuals grew more slowly in heavily hunted territories because constant movement reduced feeding time. The predators altered evolution itself by determining which traits survived. In several South American fossil sites, multiple Mapusaurus individuals appear together near massive sauropod remains. The distribution of bones suggests simultaneous feeding rather than sequential scavenging. This does not prove coordinated hunting, but it supports tolerance among large adults. Even limited cooperation would dramatically increase hunting success against enormous prey. Where a single hunter risked injury, several could share danger. These predators, therefore, occupied a position unlike most carnivores before or after. They were not ambush specialists, nor solitary pursuit hunters. They were pressure hunters, capable of maintaining threat over extended periods. Once they committed to a target, the outcome was rarely uncertain. Time itself became their ally. During this era, tyrannosaurs remained absent from the top tier of predation. Their fossils rarely appear in the same abundance as the giants. Where both are found, the tyrannosaurs are smaller and less numerous. They likely avoided direct interaction, feeding on smaller animals or leftover carcasses. Evolution had not yet provided them with the tools required to compete. Yet, evidence shows they were evolving in a specific direction. Their skull bones fused into thicker structures capable of withstanding greater forces. Their teeth became rounder in cross-section, stronger against bending. Their bite mechanics shifted toward pressure generation rather than slicing motion. These changes suggest a future role that differed completely from the current rulers. They were becoming bone processors. Scavenging reinforced this adaptation. Carcasses stripped of soft tissue still contained nutrition locked inside bones. A predator capable of breaking skeletal material could exploit food others could not. Gradually, the tyrannosaurs moved toward a strategy based on maximum extraction rather than minimal resistance. This difference remained minor, while prey animals were gigantic. Breaking the bone of a 20-meter herbivore required strength beyond their reach. But as ecosystems diversified, medium-sized herbivores became more common. Against such animals, crushing bites gained effectiveness. Still, the giant slicing predators held their position. Climate fluctuations continued altering landscapes. Some floodplains dried seasonally. Forest patches expanded in certain regions. Large prey herds became more concentrated around reliable water sources. This created choke points where predators encountered prey more frequently but in tighter terrain. Long pursuit hunts became shorter encounters. In these environments, rapid, decisive attacks began offering advantages. The carcharodontosaurs adapted as best they could. Their size still granted authority, and their cutting bites remained lethal. But they were optimized for a world of wide open distances and massive prey. As ecological diversity increased, specialization became a limitation. Meanwhile, tyrannosaurs gradually increased in size. They were not yet giants, but they were no longer small. Their improved senses allowed them to detect prey quickly in dense terrain. Their developing bite strength enabled them to end fights faster against mid-sized animals. Two predator philosophies now existed side by side. One inflicted many wounds over time. The other moved toward ending struggles quickly. For millions of years, these approaches coexisted, each suited to different prey and habitats. But evolution favors flexibility when environments fluctuate. A hunter capable of adapting to multiple food sources gains resilience when conditions change. The slicing giants remained masters of their original domain. Yet the world around them was slowly shifting away from that domain. Not abruptly enough to cause immediate extinction, but steadily enough to erode long-term dominance. The rise of the giant killers had shaped the age they ruled. However, the same passage of time that elevated them was preparing to replace them. They did not fall in battle. They were overtaken by a changing world, and the predators waiting in their shadow were becoming ready to inherit it. By the middle of the Cretaceous period, the lineage of slicing predators reached its greatest expression. The earlier hunters, such as Giganotosaurus, had proven the design effective, but evolution continued refining it, increasing scale and efficiency. In South America, a predator emerged that represented the peak of this strategy, Giganotosaurus. Its name translates to giant southern lizard, but the title does not fully convey its significance. This animal was not merely large, it embodied an entire era of predatory dominance. Measuring its proportions revealed its role. The skull was elongated, longer than that of Tyrannosaurus rex, but lighter in construction. The jaws opened wide enough to grasp enormous sections of flesh. Instead of concentrating force at a single crushing point, its bite spread damage across a broader area. Each attack maximized tissue destruction rather than pressure. Its teeth reinforced this design. Flattened side to side and lined with serrations, they resembled blades rather than spikes. When the jaws closed, they did not puncture deeply into bone. They carved through muscle, leaving wounds that bled heavily and resisted clotting. A single bite could remove large amounts of flesh. Several bites could disable movement. The skeleton showed powerful neck musculature, enabling rapid lateral strikes. This allowed the predator to slash while moving, minimizing exposure to defensive blows. The tail balanced the body during quick directional changes. Tyrannosaurus did not need to overpower its prey in one moment. It needed only to begin a process. Evidence from fossil sites suggests multiple individuals sometimes lived within the same territory. Bone beds containing several similar-sized skeletons indicate either social tolerance or repeated gatherings at feeding sites. Against gigantic herbivores, several attackers could maintain continuous pressure, forcing the prey to defend from multiple directions at once. This transformed the hunt from a brief confrontation into a prolonged event. A sauropod might walk for hours, while predators followed. Each time it slowed, a new attack occurred. Fresh wounds accumulated. Eventually, its pace failed. Once it could no longer keep distance, the hunters committed fully. The final moments were not explosive, but inevitable. Such hunting behavior reshaped ecosystems or specialization. Smaller carnivores fed on leftovers. Scavengers waited at safe distances until the giants finished. The tyrannosaurs, meanwhile, existed on entirely different continents and at smaller sizes. They had not yet developed into apex hunters. Had they encountered Giganotosaurus at this time, they would have faced a predator far more experienced at confronting massive prey. The Tyrannosaur strategy of crushing bites had not yet matured enough to challenge a slicing giant in its own domain. This was the peak of the Carcharodontosaur dynasty. Their influence extended beyond South America. In Africa, similarly massive relatives patrolled floodplains filled with large herbivores. In Asia, related forms occupied comparable niches. Across much of the planet, ecosystems featured one central figure, a giant slicing predator built to weaken animals too large for sudden death. Yet, evolutionary success contains its own vulnerability. Specialization excels when conditions remain stable. The more refined the design, the less adaptable it becomes when the environment changes. Giganotosaurus was nearly perfect for hunting enormous, slow-moving herbivores across wide-open terrain. But the Cretaceous world was not finished changing. New herbivore groups began appearing. Some were smaller and faster. Others possessed defensive armor or horned skulls capable of injuring attackers. Forested regions expanded in certain areas, limiting long-distance pursuit. The dominance of the largest prey species began to fragment. For the slicing giants, every adaptation of their prey required more effort to overcome. They remained effective, but efficiency slowly declined. Hunts required more attempts, more time, and greater risk. Over generations, even slight inefficiencies accumulate into evolutionary pressure. Meanwhile, in distant northern continents, tyrannosaurs continued evolving heavier skulls and stronger bites. They hunted animals that demanded decisive force rather than repeated cutting. They were not yet dominant, but their design favored versatility. They could consume bone, muscle, and cartilage completely, extracting more nutrition from each kill. Two predator lineages were moving toward opposite extremes. One toward maximum size and slicing specialization. The other toward power and adaptability. At this moment in time, the slicing giant reigned supreme. Giganotosaurus represented the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. It ruled a world tailored to its strengths, facing no equal challenger. But evolution measures dominance across eras, not moments. The very perfection that made it unstoppable in its present environment would limit its survival in the future. The greatest predator alive had appeared, and its age was already beginning to pass. The authority of Giganotosaurus did not come from constant conflict. Like most apex predators, it rarely needed to prove its dominance. Presence alone altered behavior around it. Herbivores moved cautiously near open ground. Smaller carnivores retreated when its silhouette appeared along the horizon. The environment organized itself around the expectations of its arrival. Large predators conserve energy. Every injury risks death. Every failed hunt wastes strength. For Giganotosaurus, intimidation reduced those risks. A massive herbivore herd would not scatter immediately at its approach. Instead, they tightened formation, facing outward, forcing the predator to evaluate carefully. The goal was never reckless attack, but calculated selection. The weakest individual mattered most. Injured animals, the elderly, or the very young, became targets. Observations from fossil injury patterns suggest many attacks occurred on animals already compromised. This does not indicate weakness in the predator, but efficiency. Evolution favors survival, not fairness. Removing vulnerable prey provided high success rates with minimal danger. Once a target was chosen, the strategy unfolded gradually. The predator approached within striking distance, delivered a deep slashing bite, and withdrew before retaliation. Blood began to flow immediately. The prey attempted escape, but escape meant separation. Separation meant vulnerability. Each attempt to flee only increased distance from herd protection. Time replaced speed as the decisive factor. Over hours, the wounded animal slowed. The predators followed without rushing, allowing exhaustion and blood loss to complete the work. Only when resistance failed did they close in for repeated attacks. Death often occurred long after the first contact, not from a single fatal strike, but from cumulative damage. Such hunts shaped population dynamics. Herd sizes remained large because only a fraction were lost at a time. However, continuous pressure ensured no species grew unchecked. The slicing giants acted as regulators, preventing ecological imbalance. Their disappearance would later create ripple effects across food webs. Despite this success, signs of limitation appeared in subtle ways. The largest prey required extended hunts that demanded energy investment. If environmental conditions reduced herd availability, the predator faced difficulty sustaining itself. Specialization in giant prey reduced flexibility when prey diversity increased. During this same era, different herbivores spread across northern continents. Hadrosaurs and early ceratopsians moved in larger numbers but smaller body sizes than sauropods. They were faster and more maneuverable. A predator designed for long pursuit against towering animals found such prey less predictable. Repeated slicing attacks were harder to deliver against animals capable of sudden turns and group defense. The slicing giants could still kill them, but less efficiently. Meanwhile, tyrannosaurs adapted to these changing prey types. Their developing bite force allowed rapid immobilization. A single well-placed bite could cripple an animal immediately rather than relying on prolonged weakening. Their forward-facing eyes improved distance judgment, crucial for striking accurately in brief encounters. They hunted differently. Instead of extended pressure, they relied on decisive engagement. This reduced exposure time and energy cost. They also consumed carcasses thoroughly, including bone, allowing survival even when hunts were infrequent. The ability to process an entire skeleton provided resilience during lean periods. The two predator types thus occupied diverging ecological strategies. The slicing giants excelled where prey was enormous and abundant. The emerging tyrannosaurs performed better where prey was varied and mobility increased. At first, these differences posed no threat to Giganotosaurus and its relatives. Their territories still contained sufficient large herbivores, but gradual climatic changes altered vegetation patterns. Some regions became more seasonal, concentrating animals near water sources. Encounters became shorter and more frequent, favoring predators capable of immediate disabling attacks. Efficiency shifted from endurance to impact. Fossil records show carcharodontosaurs disappearing in several regions, while mid-sized tyrannosaurs increased in diversity. The transition occurred over millions of years, too slow to observe directly, but clear in geological layers. No evidence suggests direct battles between them caused the change. Instead, the environment began rewarding different abilities. The slicing giants had reached the peak possible within their design. Further growth would increase energy demands without improving hunting success. Evolution rarely maintains forms that cannot adapt further. Gradually, populations declined as reproduction could not offset ecological pressure. The era that created Giganotosaurus was fading. In its time, it stood unmatched, a predator built for confronting animals larger than any future land carnivore would regularly face. But dominance depends on conditions. When conditions transform, even the greatest hunter loses advantage. The world that required patient giants was giving way to a world that favored decisive killers. The rise of a new kind of predator had begun, though it had not yet produced the legendary tyrant king. The giants still ruled their remaining territories, but their supremacy no longer expanded. For the first time in millions of years, their lineage faced decline not from defeat, but from irrelevance. The apex predator had reached perfection, and perfection left no room to change. While the slicing giants reached their peak across southern continents, another evolutionary story unfolded quietly in the north. It did not begin with massive bodies or terrifying jaws. It began with small predators surviving by awareness rather than intimidation. Early tyrannosaurs were nothing like their future descendant, Tyrannosaurus rex. They were lightly built animals, some scarcely taller than a person at the hip. Their arms were longer relative to their bodies, their skulls narrow, and their teeth modest in size. In a direct encounter with the great carcharodontosaurs, they would have retreated immediately. Yet they possessed a different advantage. Their senses were unusually refined. The position of their eyes allowed overlapping vision fields, granting depth perception rare among large theropods of the time. This enabled accurate targeting when attacking fast-moving prey. Their inner ear structures suggest excellent balance and head stabilization, important for precise strikes rather than wide slashing motions. They lived in environments where visibility changed constantly. Forest edges, riverbanks, and broken terrain replaced the endless open plains favored by slicing giants. Here, long pursuit hunts were difficult. A predator needed to judge distance quickly, attack effectively, and end encounters before prey escaped into dense cover. This demanded precision. Over generations, tyrannosaurs developed thicker skull bones. Instead of elongating like those of the slicing giants, their skulls deepened, muscle attachment points enlarged, allowing stronger closing force. Teeth became thicker and more rounded in cross-section, resisting breakage during impact with bone. They were not yet bone crushers, but they were becoming impact predators. Their diet reflected flexibility. They hunted smaller herbivores, omnivorous dinosaurs, and occasionally scavenged from larger carcasses. Scavenging proved especially important. While the slicing giants consumed large portions of prey, they often left skeletal remains intact. Tyrannosaurs, capable of breaking these remains, accessed nutrients unavailable to others. Every carcass became an opportunity to practice stronger biting. Unlike the specialists dominating the south, tyrannosaurs faced varied prey types. Some animals were fast and required quick reactions. Others were armored and demanded powerful bites. Some food sources were dead rather than alive. Each scenario selected for adaptability rather than a single perfected technique. This adaptability influenced their brains as well. Fossil endocasts show enlarged olfactory regions, indicating an acute sense of smell. They could locate food over long distances, arriving early enough to exploit resources efficiently, but late enough to avoid danger. Timing became part of their survival strategy. They did not challenge giants directly. They waited for conditions favorable to them. Over millions of years, their bodies grew larger, not explosively, but steadily. Each generation slightly increased mass while preserving balance and sensory capability. Their legs remained strong for forward acceleration, useful in sudden engagements. Their tails counterbalanced heavier skulls that were evolving to deliver stronger bites. The difference between predator styles grew clearer. The slicing giants needed space and massive prey. The tyrannosaurs needed opportunity. As northern ecosystems shifted toward greater diversity of mid-sized herbivores, tyrannosaurs found increasing success. A decisive bite to a limb could immobilize prey quickly. Rather than following for hours, they ended hunts within minutes. Energy expenditure decreased, allowing survival even when prey density fluctuated. These traits did not make them dominant yet. Larger predators still existed in many regions, and the tyrannosaurs remained one competitor among several. However, they were no longer marginal scavengers. They were becoming efficient hunters, capable of occupying the apex role when conditions allowed. The environment continued to change gradually. Continental drift rearranged coastlines, forming inland seas that divided habitats. Populations isolated by geography evolved independently. In these separated ecosystems, tyrannosaurs diversified further, experimenting with body proportions and hunting strategies. Some remained mid-sized pursuit hunters. Others began trending toward gigantism. The stage was being set for a predator unlike any before it. Not the fastest, not the largest relative to prey, but equipped with a combination of sensory awareness, mechanical strength, and dietary flexibility that allowed survival across varied conditions. Where the slicing giants represented perfected specialization, tyrannosaurs represented accumulating potential. They had not yet claimed the throne of apex predator, but evolution was preparing them to inherit it when the world no longer favored the rulers that came before. As tyrannosaurs increased in size and capability, the transformation within their skulls became the most important change of all. Their heads were no longer merely tools for grasping prey. They were becoming structural weapons. In earlier theropods, skull bones remained separated by flexible joints that absorbed stress during biting. This design suited slicing predators that avoided heavy contact with bone. But tyrannosaurs developed a different arrangement. Their skull bones interlocked tightly, reinforced by ridges and overlapping connections. Instead of absorbing force, the skull transmitted it. When their jaws closed, pressure traveled through the entire head. This allowed them to bite harder without damaging their own skeleton. Muscle attachment points expanded along the back of the skull, supporting increasingly powerful jaw muscles. The lower jaw thickened and resisted bending. Teeth grew stout and rounded, capable of surviving impact with bone rather than glancing off it. They were no longer evolving to avoid bone. They were evolving to destroy it. This shift changed feeding behavior dramatically. Rather than slicing flesh away and leaving a carcass behind, tyrannosaurs consumed nearly everything. Bite marks on fossilized bones showed deep punctures and fractures. Entire limb bones were crushed and digested. Marrow, inaccessible to most predators, became a reliable food source. The ecological advantage was enormous. In environments where prey populations fluctuated, the ability to extract maximum nutrition from each kill meant survival during scarcity. A single carcass could sustain a tyrannosaur far longer than it could sustain a slicing predator. They did not depend on constant success in hunting large animals. They depended on efficiency. Meanwhile, their senses continued sharpening. The forward-facing eyes provided binocular vision, allowing accurate distance estimation. This improved striking accuracy, crucial when delivering a single decisive bite. Their sense of smell detected decay across great distances, enabling them to locate carcasses rapidly. They became both hunters and reclaimers of the ecosystem. As herbivore diversity increased, this versatility proved valuable. Not all prey required endurance chases. Many species relied on speed or defensive formations rather than sheer size. A predator capable of crippling one individual quickly could exploit these herds effectively. In contrast, slicing giants faced increasing difficulty with such prey. Their attacks required repeated contact, but agile animals avoided multiple engagements. The cost of hunting rose while the reward decreased. The tyrannosaurs exploited this difference. Instead of pursuing prey across kilometers, they ambushed or intercepted. A powerful bite to the pelvis or neck ended resistance rapidly. Even if the prey escaped temporarily, severe injury ensured eventual collapse nearby. Energy expenditure remained low compared to extended pursuit. Fossil trackways suggest sudden directional bursts rather than continuous following. Their legs were built for strong forward acceleration, not marathon chasing. They needed only brief contact to determine outcome. As climate shifted toward greater seasonal variation, such efficiency became increasingly advantageous. During dry periods, prey congregated around limited water sources. Encounters became frequent but brief. The predator that could finish a hunt quickly avoided dangerous confrontations with defensive herds. Gradually, tyrannosaurs grew larger still. Species such as Apalachiosaurus and later Albertosaurus displayed proportions approaching the famous Tyrannosaurus rex. Their skulls deepened further, teeth thickened, and bite force increased dramatically. They were now capable of killing animals their own size without prolonged struggle. The ecological hierarchy began changing. In regions where giant slicing predators declined, tyrannosaurs moved into the vacant role. They did not replicate the same hunting strategy. Instead, they replaced endurance predation with decisive impact predation. The structure of the food web reorganized around their abilities. Scavengers adapted to smaller leftovers. Herbivores altered defensive strategies, emphasizing vigilance over endurance. The entire environment adjusted to a new style of apex hunter. Yet, the transition remained incomplete. Some continents still hosted the older dynasty of giants, while others increasingly favored the rising tyrannosaurs. For a span of geological time, two eras overlapped: the fading age of cutters and the ascending age of crushers. Had they met in equal conditions, the outcome would depend on circumstance. The slicing predator excelled in prolonged engagement against massive prey. The tyrannosaur excelled in sudden, decisive combat against varied targets. Each was optimized for a different world, but worlds do not remain divided forever. By the late Cretaceous, the environments that favored slicing giants diminished further. Prey species changed composition. Enclosed habitats increased. Massive sauropod populations reduced in some regions. The advantages of endurance hunting weakened year by year. The tyrannosaurs did not defeat their predecessors through battle. They outlasted them through suitability. When the last of the giant slicing predators disappeared from northern ecosystems, the stage cleared. Into that space stepped the final and most formidable descendant of the evolving lineage. Soon, the tyrannosaur would not merely compete for dominance, it would define it. There is no fossil site on Earth where Tyrannosaurus rex and Giganotosaurus stand preserved together. No footprint crosses the other's trail. No tooth mark from one has been found in the bone of the other. They lived in different places and different times, separated by millions of years and entire continents. Yet their comparison remains unavoidable. They represent two ultimate solutions to the same evolutionary problem: how to become the apex predator of a world filled with enormous prey. One perfected slicing endurance, the other perfected crushing force. Their meeting never occurred, but the contrast between them reveals why the crown of dominance passed from one lineage to another. Giganotosaurus belonged to a world dominated by giant sauropods roaming open terrain. In such an environment, killing required persistence. Its body reflected this necessity. Its skull was long to maximize reach. Its bite was fast to deliver repeated wounds. Its teeth were thin to cut efficiently through flesh. It did not need to crush bone because its prey could not escape the cumulative effect of multiple attacks. Tyrannosaurus rex evolved in a different world. By the late Cretaceous, northern continents hosted large but more varied herbivores. Hadrosaurs moved in large herds but relied on speed and maneuverability. Ceratopsians possessed horns and heavy frills capable of injuring attackers. Ankylosaurs carried armored plates and tail clubs strong enough to shatter bone. These animals could not be weakened slowly in open pursuit without significant risk. They demanded immediate disabling force. The skull of Tyrannosaurus rex grew deep and wide, reinforced like a structural beam. Its jaw muscles were among the largest relative to body size of any terrestrial animal known. Estimates of bite force exceed that of any other land predator capable of crushing bone with a single closure. Its teeth were thick cones designed not to slice, but to withstand enormous pressure. Where Giganotosaurus removed flesh, Tyrannosaurus destroyed structure. A single bite to the pelvis could immobilize prey instantly. A bite to the skull could shatter bone and end resistance. This allowed shorter hunts and reduced exposure to defensive counterattacks. Instead of relying on exhaustion, Tyrannosaurus relied on mechanical failure. Their sensory equipment differed as well. Tyrannosaurus possessed forward-facing eyes, providing strong binocular vision, enabling accurate targeting of critical areas. Its sense of smell ranked among the most developed in theropods, allowing detection of carcasses from long distances. Giganotosaurus, while capable, depended more on following visible herds than locating hidden food. If both animals existed in the same habitat, their strategies would clash. Against a giant sauropod, Giganotosaurus would hold advantage. Its slicing attacks allowed engagement without committing to dangerous proximity. Tyrannosaurus might deliver devastating bites, but risk severe injury approaching such enormous prey. Against armored or agile prey, Tyrannosaurus would dominate. A crushing bite could overcome defenses quickly, while Giganotosaurus would require repeated contact and greater exposure to retaliation. The difference lies not in superiority, but specialization. Giganotosaurus was the perfect hunter for a world of colossal herbivores across open land. Tyrannosaurus rex was the perfect hunter for a world of varied defenses and tighter encounters. Each represents an evolutionary peak within its own environmental context. But dominance across time depends on adaptability. The slicing giant required particular prey, abundance, and terrain. The Tyrannosaur could exploit multiple food sources, from large hunts to bone-rich scavenging. When ecosystems changed, the adaptable design endured. This explains why the meeting never happened. By the time Tyrannosaurus rex evolved into its massive form, the ecological stage that supported Giganotosaurus had already vanished in the regions Tyrannosaurus inhabited. The crown did not pass through combat. It passed through replacement. The older apex predator ruled a world that no longer existed. The newer predator ruled the world that replaced it. Their rivalry is a product of imagination, yet their comparison reveals the deeper truth of evolution. The greatest predator is defined not by strength alone, but by fit to environment. Tyrannosaurus rex did not overthrow the giant killers. It inherited the throne they left behind. To understand why the throne passed from one predator lineage to another, it is necessary to imagine the pressures each faced in its own time. Evolution does not reward the most powerful creature in absolute terms. It rewards the creature that wastes the least energy surviving. Giganotosaurus lived in a system where food existed in enormous packages. A single successful hunt could provide sustenance for days. The effort required to weaken such prey justified the long pursuit strategy. Energy invested eventually returned in large quantity. Injury risk remained manageable because attacks were brief and spaced apart. But this balance depended on prey size. As ecosystems diversified, prey became smaller on average. Instead of a few gigantic animals, landscapes supported many mid-sized ones. A predator designed for multi-day hunts against one target faced diminishing returns. Time spent weakening a single animal could equal the effort required to capture several smaller animals through decisive attacks. Here, the Tyrannosaur strategy excelled. A crushing bite allowed rapid immobilization. Instead of following for hours, the predator ended resistance quickly and consumed nearly everything. Bone fragments in Tyrannosaur coprolites show extensive digestion of skeletal material, extracting nutrients unavailable to slicing predators. Even after scavengers fed, little usable matter remained. Efficiency favored the crusher. Speed of resolution also affected safety. Prolonged hunts exposed predators to environmental hazards, competition, and injury from defensive blows. Quick engagements reduced these dangers. Against horned or armored prey, remaining in contact for extended periods increased risk significantly. A single precise bite minimized exposure. These differences reveal why the giant slicing predators could not simply adapt their way of hunting. Their anatomy constrained them. Long, narrow skulls could not support massive bite forces without structural failure. Thin teeth, designed for cutting, would break under crushing loads. Increasing bite strength would require redesigning the entire head. Evolution rarely reverses specialization easily. Meanwhile, tyrannosaurs continued scaling upward. As they grew larger, their bite force increased disproportionately because of skull reinforcement. Larger size allowed them to confront bigger prey while maintaining the same decisive attack strategy. They expanded into ecological roles previously occupied by other predators, eventually becoming the primary regulators of their environments. Their dominance came not from defeating former rulers, but from thriving where former rulers could not. If Giganotosaurus had appeared in the Late Cretaceous North, it would face prey capable of injuring it during repeated attacks. Horns could pierce muscle, tail clubs could break limbs, and herd defense could limit opportunities for safe slashing. The longer a hunt lasted, the greater the chance of harm. Tyrannosaurus avoided these prolonged engagements entirely. Conversely, placing Tyrannosaurus in the open plains, dominated by gigantic sauropods, would challenge its method. Delivering a decisive bite against prey many times, its mass would require close proximity to dangerous limbs and tails. The slicing strategy minimized this risk in that environment. Each predator was matched to its era. Their separation in time reflects environmental transformation rather than coincidence. Geological evidence shows that by the Late Cretaceous, many regions once inhabited by the giant slicing predators experienced ecological turnover. Plant communities changed, influencing herbivore distribution. Sauropods declined in some northern areas, replaced by more varied herbivore groups. The niche demanding endurance-cutting attacks diminished. In its place arose a niche favoring crushing capability. Thus, the Tyrannosaur became the apex predator not by surpassing the old giants in direct confrontation, but by mastering a new ecological challenge. The image of the tyrant king standing over fallen predecessors is compelling but inaccurate. The true story is quieter and more complex. One dynasty thrived while conditions suited it. Another thrived when conditions changed. Their paths never crossed because evolution had already determined the outcome through environmental selection. By the time Tyrannosaurus rex reached its enormous size, the lineage of giant slicing predators had largely vanished from its world. The meeting did not occur because it was no longer necessary. The world had chosen its new ruler. The disappearance of the giant slicing predators did not happen suddenly. There is no single layer of rock where they exist below and vanish above in a single moment. Instead, their fossils grow rarer across millions of years, appearing less frequently until entire regions no longer contain them at all. Extinction, in this case, was a process rather than an event. For tens of millions of years, the carcharodontosaurs thrived because their world favored them. Large sauropods dominated landscapes, and open terrain allowed long pursuit hunts. But Earth's surface never remains constant. Continents drifted, sea levels shifted, and climates altered rainfall patterns. Gradually, the environments that supported gigantic herbivore herds changed shape. Some floodplains fragmented into forested corridors. Others became seasonal grasslands where food availability fluctuated. Water sources concentrated animals into tighter spaces rather than wide migrations. Prey diversity increased while average body size in certain regions declined. These changes undermined the slicing strategy. The effectiveness of repeated cutting attacks depended on distance and time. A wounded sauropod required space to weaken gradually, In enclosed or crowded habitats, encounters shortened. The prey either escaped into dense cover or retaliated more effectively. The predator no longer controlled the tempo of the hunt. At the same time, new herbivore defenses evolved. Ceratopsians developed horns capable of injuring attackers during close contact. Ankylosaurs carried armored plates and tail clubs designed to break bones. Even hadrosaurs relied on herd coordination and rapid maneuvering rather than sheer size. Against such animals, prolonged engagement increased danger. The cost of each hunt rose. A predator that required multiple attacks now faced greater injury risk than a predator capable of decisive impact. Over generations, individuals unable to secure consistent food reproduced less successfully. Populations declined slowly, not catastrophically. Competition also intensified. Mid-sized predators, including evolving tyrannosaurs, exploited carcasses more thoroughly. When a slicing giant abandoned remains after feeding, little edible matter was left once bone crushers arrived. Food resources that once supported multiple large carnivores could now sustain fewer specialists. Energy balance shifted against the giants. Reproduction rates for massive predators were inherently low. Large animals mature slowly and produce fewer offspring. Even slight decreases in adult survival or juvenile success affect long-term population stability. As environmental pressures accumulated, recovery between generations became difficult. Meanwhile, tyrannosaurs were increasing in size and efficiency. Their ability to process bone meant they survived longer between hunts. They required fewer successful kills to sustain themselves. During periods of scarcity, this difference became decisive. Where a slicing predator starved, a bone-crushing predator endured. Geographic isolation accelerated the transition. As inland seas divided continents, populations became separated into smaller ranges. Reduced territory meant fewer prey encounters for large specialists. Smaller, adaptable predators handled fragmentation better. They required less continuous space to survive. Over millions of years, these factors compounded. The carcharodontosaurs did not vanish in a single catastrophe. They gradually retreated from region after region, first absent from northern landmasses, then reduced in southern ones, until only scattered populations remained. Eventually, even those disappeared. By the time the Late Cretaceous approached, the lineage that once dominated multiple continents was gone from the ecosystems where tyrannosaurs would later reign. The throne was empty. The rise of Tyrannosaurus rex was not the story of defeating a rival in combat. It was the story of arriving after environmental change removed the previous rulers. The new predator did not need to overthrow the giants. It needed only to thrive in a world no longer suitable for them. The titans vanished because the world that created them vanished first. Even after their numbers declined, the disappearance of the giant slicing predators left traces in the ecosystems they once governed. Fossil layers show subtle shifts in animal behavior following their absence. Herbivore populations changed structure. Some species expanded into territories previously avoided, while others altered growth patterns once the pressure of long pursuit hunts lifted. Predators shape prey evolution, and removing a dominant predator reshapes survival strategies. Without constant harassment from endurance hunters, herds did not need to maintain long-distance migrations at the same intensity. Instead, they concentrated around dependable food and water sources. This clustering favored predators capable of sudden, powerful attacks rather than prolonged following. The environment increasingly rewarded impact over persistence. At the same time, carcass utilization changed. Where slicing giants once left significant remains, new predators consumed far more completely. Bone fragments bearing deep crushing marks appear frequently in late Cretaceous deposits. Scavengers adapted accordingly, becoming smaller or specializing in materials previously ignored. Energy flowed differently through the ecosystem. The old giants had acted as regulators over immense ranges. Their slow hunts influenced movement across kilometers. When they vanished, local interactions replaced wide-ranging ones. Predator and prey encounters became shorter but more intense. This environment favored intelligence, sensory precision, and mechanical power. The emerging tyrannosaurs fit these conditions precisely. Their bodies continued enlarging, eventually producing species approaching the mass of earlier giant predators, but with entirely different functional design. A large tyrannosaur did not need the same territory size because each kill yielded more usable nutrition. It could occupy areas fragmented by rivers, forests, and seasonal barriers. Fossil evidence shows tyrannosaurs appearing as apex predators shortly after the disappearance of carcharodontosaurs in several regions. The transition was not immediate replacement, but progressive occupation. Where multiple large predator species once coexisted, eventually only one remained dominant. This simplification of the predator hierarchy stabilized ecosystems under new rules. The Tyrannosaur's hunting strategy also affected prey mortality patterns. Instead of prolonged weakening, deaths became more sudden. Bone fractures and catastrophic injuries appear more often than healed, slicing wounds in later deposits. The style of predation changed the rhythm of life and death. For the giants that came before, adaptation would have required extensive anatomical redesign. Shortening skulls, strengthening teeth, and reinforcing bone structures across generations might have allowed transition toward crushing bites. But evolutionary change operates incrementally. The immediate pressures reduced population size faster than new adaptations could spread. They were locked into success, suited for a past world. As the late Cretaceous progressed, the last of the slicing dynasty disappeared entirely. No fossils from the final few million years of the period show their presence in regions dominated by large tyrannosaurs. The ecological stage had fully transformed. When Tyrannosaurus rex eventually emerged in North America, it inherited an apex role long vacated. It did not face predecessors still competing for dominance. The lineage that once ruled across continents existed only in stone beneath older sediments. Their extinction carried no dramatic singular cause. No asteroid marked their end. No sudden plague removed them. They faded as the balance of advantage shifted away from their specialization. In evolution, losing relevance can be as final as sudden disaster. The age of the cutting giants closed quietly. Their reign had lasted tens of millions of years, longer than the entire span separating modern humans from their earliest ancestors. Yet all of it ended gradually, unnoticed by the creatures living through it. The world did not mourn them. It adapted, and into that adapted world stepped a predator perfectly matched to its new rules. By the Late Cretaceous, the ecological landscape of North America had changed completely from the age of the slicing giants. Inland seas divided the continent into separate landmasses, climates varied by region, and herbivore communities diversified into multiple defensive strategies. It was into this transformed world that the final and most formidable tyrannosaur appeared, Tyrannosaurus rex. Unlike its small ancestors, this animal reached lengths exceeding 12 meters and mass rivaling the largest terrestrial carnivores in history. Yet its significance was not measured only by size. Its body represented the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary adjustment toward decisive predation. The skull alone defined its role. Deep, heavily reinforced and packed with thick conical teeth, it functioned as a crushing instrument. Jaw muscles anchored across broad surfaces generated extraordinary force. When the jaws closed, bone did not resist for long. Fractures spread instantly, disabling prey in seconds rather than hours. This changed the entire structure of the food chain. Prey animals could no longer rely solely on endurance or distance. Even brief contact could be fatal. Hadrosaurs, though fast, risked catastrophic injury if caught. Ceratopsians wielded horns and frills for defense, but a well-placed bite could shatter vertebrae. Ankylosaurs possessed armor and tail clubs, yet attacks from advantageous angles overcame even heavy protection. The tyrant king hunted by resolution rather than persistence. Fossil evidence shows bite marks on numerous prey species, many healed, indicating survival after encounters. This suggests the predator did not always need to kill immediately to benefit. A severely injured animal might collapse later, providing a safe meal without extended pursuit. The bite itself determined the outcome long before feeding began. Its senses enhanced this efficiency. Forward-facing eyes allowed accurate targeting of vulnerable regions such as the hips or neck. Enlarged olfactory structures enabled detection of carcasses over vast distances. It could locate both living prey and recent kills reliably minimizing wasted effort. Territory size shrank compared to earlier giant predators. Because each carcass yielded more nutrition, fewer successful hunts were required. This allowed the Tyrannosaur to maintain dominance within a manageable range, patrolling regularly rather than migrating continuously. The absence of competing giant predators reinforced its position. Smaller carnivores existed but avoided confrontation. Some specialized in speed, others in scavenging, but none matched the combination of size and power. The apex role consolidated into a single dominant species across large regions. Behavioral patterns of prey adjusted accordingly. The tyrant king inherited a throne built by earlier dynasties. Its crushing bite, advanced senses, and adaptable feeding habits allowed it to thrive in the late Cretaceous world. Yet even as it hunted, forces beyond evolution were reshaping the planet. Continental movement altered climates. Sea levels fluctuated. Vegetation patterns shifted gradually across generations. These changes alone might have eventually replaced Tyrannosaurus with another predator better suited to a new environment, just as it had replaced the slicing giants. But a far more sudden event awaited. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck Earth with energy beyond any ecological pressure. The impact triggered wildfires, atmospheric darkness, and long-term climate disruption. Plant life collapsed in many regions. Herbivore populations declined rapidly. Carnivores that depended on them could not survive the chain reaction. The tyrant king faced an opponent no adaptation could overcome. Its senses could not detect the coming winter. Its bite could not crush a sky without sunlight. Its strength held no advantage against starvation spreading across continents. Within a short geological moment, the age of large terrestrial dinosaurs ended entirely. The extinction did not distinguish between ruler and subordinate. All perished alike. In this way, the predator above the king was not another animal, it was the planet itself. Environmental change had already replaced earlier dynasties slowly. This time, the change arrived suddenly and universally. After the extinction, ecosystems rebuilt from smaller surviving creatures. Mammals diversified, filling niches once held by dinosaurs. New apex predators evolved over millions of years, none resembling the giants that preceded them. The cycle continued, but with different participants. The lesson of the tyrant king's fall mirrors the disappearance of the slicing giants before it. Dominance exists only within context. Evolution produces specialists for particular worlds, and when those worlds vanish, even perfection cannot endure. Tyrannosaurus rex did not fall to a stronger hunter. It fell because every throne in nature is temporary. After the extinction event, silence returned to landscapes once defined by enormous footsteps. The vast floodplains, forests, and river systems remained, but the creatures that had shaped them were gone. No giant predator patrolled the horizons. No massive herbivore migrations carved pathways across continents. The ecological structures built over more than 100 million years dissolved within a geological instant. Recovery did not begin with giants. Small animals, many of which had lived unnoticed beneath the rule of dinosaurs, survived because their needs were modest. They required less food, reproduced quickly, and adapted to unstable conditions. Among them were early mammals, creatures that had existed throughout the age of dinosaurs but rarely dominated any ecosystem. With the disappearance of large reptilian rulers, opportunity appeared. Over millions of years, mammals diversified into forms that filled empty niches. Some returned to the seas, others took to the air, and many occupied terrestrial predator roles once held by dinosaurs. Yet none immediately approached the scale of the former giants. Ecosystems rebuilt gradually, layer by layer, from small beginnings. The pattern mirrored earlier transitions. When the slicing giants vanished, tyrannosaurs rose to prominence. When the tyrannosaurs disappeared, mammals inherited the open roles. In each case, the new rulers did not defeat the old through strength alone. They thrived because conditions favored their design. The concept of a permanent apex predator proved illusionary. The carcharodontosaurs once appeared unmatched, ruling for tens of millions of years. Tyrannosaurus rex later seemed the ultimate culmination of predatory evolution, yet its dominance lasted only a fraction of that time. The difference was not ability, but circumstance. Each lineage matched its environment perfectly until the environment changed. Evolution does not move toward a final superior form. It moves toward suitability within a moment. In later eras, mammalian predators such as large carnivores and eventually humans occupied apex positions. They differed radically from the dinosaurs, relying on endurance, cooperation, and intelligence rather than massive physical weapons. Yet their role followed the same principle: dominance dependent on conditions. The story of the predator, feared even by future legends, is therefore not about a single animal. It is about succession. Each ruler of the prehistoric world stood atop a structure built by earlier forms and destined to be replaced by later ones. The slicing giants dominated because enormous prey required patient hunters. The tyrant king dominated because varied prey required decisive force. Later, predators dominated because changing climates favored adaptability and cognition. Every reign appeared absolute to the creatures living within it. None lasted indefinitely. When we imagine the greatest predator in Earth's history, we often picture the largest or strongest individual. But the fossil record tells a different story. Greatness belongs to the lineage that fits its world best, and that world never remains constant. The giants of one era become impossible in another. Tyrannosaurus rex stands as an icon because it ruled near the end of the dinosaur age, leaving clear evidence close to the boundary of extinction. The slicing giants ruled far longer, but left earlier chapters of stone. Both were supreme within their time, yet neither held power beyond it. In the end, the apex predator above every king is change itself. The throne of life has never been empty, only occupied temporarily by those best suited to its moment. When the dust settled and the darkness lifted, the world did not remember its rulers. The rivers still flowed across the same floodplains where enormous feet once pressed into soft ground. Forests returned where herds once traveled. Wind moved across empty valleys that had echoed with the calls of animals larger than any creature alive today. The planet itself continued, almost unchanged in appearance, yet something fundamental had vanished. For more than 100 million years, life on land had been structured around giants. Every niche, every behavior, and every evolutionary path had been influenced by the presence of animals capable of reshaping entire landscapes simply by existing. The slicing predators of the earlier eras and the tyrant king that followed were not isolated wonders. They were central pillars holding up an entire ecological architecture. When they disappeared, that architecture collapsed. At first, the change was not dramatic. Small creatures still searched for food, insects still moved through the soil, plants still reached toward the sun once it returned. But the relationships between living things shifted completely. Without massive herbivores stripping vegetation, plant growth patterns altered. Without enormous predators regulating populations across wide distances, survival depended on different skills. The world grew quieter, but also more unpredictable. Large carcasses no longer appeared to feed entire communities at once. Instead, food sources became scattered and temporary. Animals that survived were those capable of adapting quickly rather than dominating physically. Reproduction accelerated, lifespans shortened, and competition became constant rather than hierarchical. The age of slow certainty had ended. During the reign of the slicing giants, death often arrived after long pursuit. During the reign of the tyrant king, death arrived suddenly through overwhelming force. After their disappearance, death became irregular and opportunistic. Predators were smaller and more numerous, and no single creature controlled entire regions. For millions of years, ecosystems rebuilt themselves around these new rules. Mammals diversified into grazers, climbers, burrowers, and hunters. Birds expanded into forms that replaced some aerial roles once held by reptiles. The memory of dinosaurs did not vanish instantly, but it faded generation by generation as new life filled the spaces they left behind. Yet, the influence of the giants remained embedded in the world. Plant communities evolved in response to the grazing pressures of the past. River paths still followed, routes shaped by ancient migrations. Even the distribution of nutrients in soil reflected patterns created by animals that had not walked the earth for millions of years. The past continued guiding the present long after the creatures themselves were gone. In this way, the slicing predators and the tyrant king never truly disappeared. They became part of the foundation upon which later ecosystems developed. The predators that followed did not replace them completely. They inherited environments shaped by them. Every future hunter lived in a world designed by earlier rulers. The concept of the ultimate predator, therefore, exists only within a narrow window of time. Giganotosaurus ruled its era completely because the world required endurance hunters. Tyrannosaurus rex ruled its era completely because the world required decisive force. Later, predators ruled because the world required adaptability. Each appeared unmatched while alive. Each became impossible once conditions changed. The fossil record preserves bones, but the deeper record preserves patterns: rise, dominance, decline, replacement, not once, but repeatedly across Earth's history. The story of the apex predator, feared even by future legends, is not about fear itself. It is about inevitability. No design remains perfect forever. Long after the tyrant king vanished, the planet continued shaping new forms of life suited to new environments. And somewhere within those new forms, the same principle persisted. Survival belongs not to the strongest, but to the one best matched to its moment. The giants ruled because they fit their world. The world changed, and the rulers changed with it. Millions of years passed before any creature would look upon the bones of the giants and understand what they were seeing. Long after the last Tyrannosaur hunt, and long after the final slicing predator vanished, the ground preserved their existence in silence. Layer upon layer of sediment buried skeletons beneath rivers, forests, and eventually plains inhabited by entirely different animals. The world forgot them because nothing living had reason to remember. Predators continued evolving, filling similar roles but never recreating the same scale. Mammalian hunters developed sharper senses and greater endurance, yet none possessed skulls capable of crushing bone with the force of Tyrannosaurus. Others relied on group coordination to overcome prey larger than themselves, echoing strategies once used by the slicing giants, but without the same physical magnitude. Nature repeated functions, not forms. The absence of giants reshaped the balance of ecosystems permanently. Large herbivores still existed, but their maximum size remained limited. Without predators specialized for attacking colossal prey, there was no longer evolutionary pressure encouraging animals to grow to extreme proportions. The ceiling of body size lowered across land animals, creating a more evenly distributed hierarchy of species. The age of overwhelming scale had ended. Eventually, a new observer appeared, capable of interpreting the past. Humans encountered fragments of bone eroding from stone and recognized them as remains of creatures unlike anything alive. At first, these discoveries produced confusion. The proportions seemed impossible. Teeth larger than tools, vertebrae larger than skulls of modern animals, claw marks preserved in rock as if frozen moments of violence. Piece by piece, the story reconstructed itself. Scientists realized that Tyrannosaurus rex had not lived alongside the slicing giants. Instead, it came after them, inheriting ecosystems already transformed by earlier rulers. The most famous predator of prehistory was not the beginning of dominance, but part of a succession. This understanding changed how the concept of a supreme hunter was viewed. The tyrant king was extraordinary, but not singular. Before, it stood hunters better suited to earlier worlds. After it came hunters better suited to later ones. The title of apex predator moved across time rather than remaining attached to one form. Stone recorded this transition clearly. Lower layers held the remains of the giant cutters, their blade like teeth, marking an age of endurance warfare. Higher layers revealed tyrannosaurs, their reinforced skulls showing the rise of crushing power. Above them appeared only smaller predators, evidence of a world rebuilding under new conditions. Each layer told a chapter without words. The discovery of these fossils allowed modern observers to see what no living creature of the time could perceive, that the greatest predators were temporary expressions of environmental balance. The slicing giants did not anticipate replacement, nor did the tyrant king. They lived within the certainty of their dominance, unaware that dominance itself was transient. Even extinction left traces of continuity. Birds, descendants of small theropods, carried forward elements of dinosaur biology into the modern world. Their bones, lungs, and behavior preserve fragments of ancient anatomy in miniature form. In this sense, the age of dinosaurs never vanished entirely. It transformed. Yet the giants themselves remain unique to their era. No modern environment could support the exact combination of climate, vegetation, and prey required for their existence. Their reign depended on conditions that no longer occur together on Earth. They were not merely animals of the past. They were animals of a specific world, a world that cannot return in the same form. And because of that, the story of the predator feared even by future legends remains complete. Not because evolution stopped, but because the context that created them ended. The bones endure, and through them the pattern becomes visible. The throne of the apex predator is never destroyed. It is always inherited.